Yes. Hi, I'm Liz. I'm from Beyond Solitaire. And I'm so happy that we're all here. We have 7 out of 8 Zenobia finalists. I am wildly excited about that. That is so cool to me. So for the people who do not already know who everybody is, or who just want to match voices with games with blurbs, why don't we just kind of go through everybody who's here? Just tell the people your name, your game, quick blurb, and then we can kind of move into some questions. Also, people in the audience, just so you know, I do have the text chat pulled up, and I am watching. So, Akar, you want to start off?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Akar Bharadvaj. I'm the designer of Tyranny of Blood, which is about changes in India's caste system under British colonialism. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I don't know what else to say about me. But
Fair enough. Damon? Damon, you there?
Damon, you might be muted. In fact, you muted, so clicking the microphone bottom left will enable you to speak to us.
I see Damon typing in the chat.
Yeah, might be having issues.
Yeah, Damon, we'll come back around. Hey, Joe, you're here. Tell us your spiel.
Hey, yes, my name is Joseph Kelly. I designed the game Molly House, which is about queer community in 1720s London, and I live in Bristol in the United Kingdom.
Excellent.
And that's
me. Awesome. And Lauren.
Hi, my name's Lauren Eno, and I created the game The Season, which is set during the Regency in Great Britain, which is 1811 to 1820, and I'm from Los Angeles, California.
All right, everybody's from all over the place. Marcel. Marcel still out there?
Hi, yeah, something. You can all hear me, right? Or
yeah.
I try to put on my microphone. Because sometimes Discord has some issues. Yeah, I'm Marcel Keuler. I made a game about the Dutch resistance during the Second World War, and which is currently on Kickstarter for a few more days, which funded, which I'm very happy about, of course. So the first Zenobia game that will be published. And yeah, it's a kind of a pick up and deliver style game, bit of a puzzle. Non-violent focused Second World War game, which is maybe also the first. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear what everybody else will talk about today.
Fantastic. And Sharia.
Hi everyone, I'm Sharia Ayuandini. I'm the designer of From Darkness to Light. The game is an engine building game about the role of women education in the fight for independence Indonesia. That is the late 1800s to the early 1900s. And I am right now sitting in Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
All right, and Will.
Hi, I'm Will Thompson. I'm the designer of Winter Rabbit. So this is a game about Cherokee culture and reciprocal economics in pre-Columbian, ancient kind of times. The game's kind of a response to, like, an indigenous response to ideas in like Euro games and 4X games. Yeah, I'm in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Excellent. And Damon, are you back enough to hear us? I know that it's storming where you
are. Yeah, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm Damon Stone. I am normally located in Atlanta, Georgia, but I am in New York right now. And as Liz just mentioned, we're having thunderstorms, so I may pop in and out, unfortunately. I am the designer for Liberation Haiti, which is a cooperative deck building turning into strategic war game, which covers the first 3 years of the Haitian Revolution, where the players all make an attempt at fighting for their liberation and for equality.
Fantastic. All right, so just so y'all know, people who are observing, I am watching the chat for questions. So if you have questions, that's fine. But you know what? I'm going to start with a question. Since you're all here, I just started wondering about this actually. So as we can see from the results, right, of the Zenobia contest, as our finalists, y'all designed an incredibly diverse set of games with very, very different approaches to history, to folklore, things from different time periods, and it's really, I'm stoked about how it turned out. But I was wondering, did y'all feel any pressure to make a certain kind of game as a historical game? Did you have to work through that? Or did you see this as an opportunity to just do it your way and roll right in?
I think I can speak first on that, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So in a sense, I mean, okay, so no, I didn't. I just kind of rolled in with what I had and the game that I wanted to make and wanted to present it in a certain way, and it definitely diverges a lot from what I think a lot of people consider historical games to be. And working with my mentor on this, I had to add a lot to the rulebook to kind of explain the rationale and the historical connection and a lot of why I made the decisions I did in this game. And I think that really helped a lot to help the judges understand where I was coming from and why the game is the way it is. So I think for me, it was a lot less of changing the game to be a certain way and a lot more of explaining why the game is the way it is.
That makes a lot of sense. Anybody else?
I can jump in. It's not so much pressure, but kind of want to raise up to that challenge. So I did come up with the idea first, and it was very clear since the very beginning that I did want to make a game about the role of women education during that fight for independence in Indonesia. So that was pretty straightforward, and thankfully, because the way that I designed the game is pretty much kind of like just following the story basically. So the mechanism, it kind of stay quite closely to how things kind of unfolded during that time. But then I kind of want to have a bit more accountability in terms of the historical aspect of it. So because of that, because of Zenobia also focusing on that aspect, I did quite some research of a lot of different things that I know only on the surface level probably, and then I need to learn a little bit more about it. So learning more about the stories of each of these women's heroes and learning more about what are the different milestones in terms of women education in Indonesia. So I learned a lot through that process. So even though, yeah, it's a little bit putting more work, I guess, but also at the same time, I feel like I learn a lot more and the game becomes a lot more, I guess, reflective of what actually happened during that time and a lot more respectful and celebrating those exact time in the Indonesian history. So I think it was actually really great that there is that kind of high focus on historical, not really accuracy, but really reflecting historically your game. That's the focus of Zenobia.
I can also just shortly mention that I already started longer ago with my game, like 4 years ago, because it's now actually today exactly 4 years ago, as my grandmother died, and she was the inspiration for starting with this game about the Dutch resistance because of her stories. And I decided to change quite a few things though because of the competition. I made most of my progress during this year, even though I was busy already for a few years before that. And I think it helped a lot for me, at least, to refine as to what part of history I wanted to focus on, which was the non-violent resistance, and try to see how I can put like a different aspect of the Dutch resistance in each different scenario. Because I knew that I cannot maybe tell everything I want in just one game session without adding unnecessary complexity for one time playing. So that is a bit what I put into when I was designing during the competition.
For me, it was really a case of me designing a game that I felt was going to be a good fit for what historical games could be, what at the same time giving a nod to like the vast history of all of these amazing games that have come before. I had originally thought about doing the entire Haitian Revolution, and then as I was going through all of the things that we were going to be judged on, and I noticed that there was a very strict requirement for needing to be finished in 2 hours. I was like, oh, there's no human way that I can create a game that is representative of the Haitian Revolution and all of its complications, which is, it expand many, many, many years. And yeah, so there was no way I was going to be able to do that in 2 hours. So I decided to focus on what I thought was the most historically compelling and compounding part of the revolution, which is the fight for abolition and equality, and therefore I guess I made the game towards specifically what the competition was about and what they were looking for. I don't know if I would say I felt pressure about that. It just seemed that if I wanted to do well, I shouldn't just ignore everything and come up with something random.
Fair enough. Anybody else?
Yeah, I kind of agreed with what Damon said. Like, I think I wouldn't describe it as pressured, but I think some of the constraints of the contest helped me focus a little bit, both in terms of time. I also think because the contest was kind of focused on underrepresented groups and underrepresented topics, I started off thinking about maybe like 30 different possible topics for a game, and then I kind of focused more on Indian culture because that's something that I have kind of a personal relationship with. So, yeah, more constraints than pressures, I'd say.
Yeah, I just agree with all of that as well. And I didn't really feel any pressure. As much as the time pressure of doing everything in a relatively short period. Even though I was further ahead than the rest, I think other people had that probably even more. But yeah, definitely was a big part of competition for everybody, I think.
Oh yeah, there's no question. Y'all did an amazing job under tremendous pressure. I cannot imagine writing, designing, creating a game, testing it out in the time span that y'all did, and it is phenomenal. So, what actually surprised y'all the most about going through this process? So, some of you are experienced game designers already. Some of you, this was your very first game, and I love having you all here to ask this. What do you think? Was the biggest surprise for you while going through the Zenobia process as a designer?
I was surprised. I thought kind of creating like the basic model of the game, I thought that happened a lot faster than I was expecting. And then everything else took a lot longer in terms of refining it and making it work. But I think just kind of envisioning a broad, complicated system and thinking about how to translate that to the table in kind of its most fundamental way as a question. I thought that I was pretty surprised at both how quickly everything kind of came together once I started thinking about it in the right way, and once it clicked, and as well as when I brought it to the table that people were having fun. Like, I think that was a part that I was paranoid about, was that I was going to make a good model and then it was going to be boring or whatever, and that thankfully didn't happen. And maybe I just got lucky, but I think that was surprising.
Yeah, I agree with Akar. It was the whole design process was very surprising to me because it was very before the competition and having to actually put my money where my mouth is and actually commit to trying to design something. I did not it was almost like I had this like it was like it was like this scary black box that was like, oh, how does this happen? And all of a sudden it's this horrible, complicated process, and then in the end it's a board game. And it really felt more like, well, you come up with a game design idea, you get the mechanics working. That was the quick part of it, and then the broad stretch of it was to go and make sure that playtest, and just make sure that it's user friendly. And that to me was like the most interesting part, that it really was what was the focus of that really wasn't that part of the design. It was the other, actually having to have humans go and you look at it and interact with it in interesting ways.
To be honest, for me, I was really surprised as I managed to make any game at all, because designing a board game always felt something very impossible for me, because after playing so many different games, it always seems like such kind of like an intricate machine when you're creating a board game, and every components, every elements are really intricately correlating with one another. So I sometimes don't know where to start on how to create a board game, and that's why being part of Zenobia Award I felt really helped, because the stages in Zenobia kind of like broken down all of the different aspects that you need to focus on when you want to create a board game, design a board game. So I'm just, by following the process, it's one step at a time on how to translate the idea that you have in your head to the table. I was really surprised that to be honest, I was surprised when I was announced as a finalist. So that was a nice surprise. But the entire process has been a really enjoyable, surprising experience for me.
Excellent. Anybody else?
I would just second what Sharia said. Yeah, I was surprised that I could put a game together. But yeah, I think Sharia basically said everything that I was thinking. Just amazed that I could go through that process and come out with something that was playable and made it to the final. So yeah, that was incredible to me.
Yeah, when I signed up, of course, I didn't know that I would get into the finals. And I was just sort of mostly surprised at how much it evolved, and every time we had to send it in, I thought, sort of now it's as good as it can get. And then I did some more play testing. I've done a lot of play testing this year, and I got a lot of feedback from people, and I thought, oh yeah, but maybe if I try this or that. So I think indeed for everybody the process went very quick. But yeah, I was surprised mostly in that, even though I made some games before, this will be my first published game. And yeah, it's just every time I was happy to continue to the next round, but at the same time surprised, because you start to doubt, as you also hear already a bit from the others, maybe how good your skills are as a game designer, how well you're actually making the experience you want to make and put in the story you want to tell with your game, or the things you want to put in there, if they come across through the mechanics, through everything else in the game. But so far, when I see all the finalists, I'm really happy to see all of them have their own unique feel, and they're all great games that I would like to try and hope get published soon.
Excellent. So I want to kind of go back to something that many of you have said, which is just kind of pointing this idea of like people engaging with your game, people enjoying your game. So what opinions have you formed going through this process about how to make something both historical, especially because many of you chose pretty heavy topics, and also fun? And how do you find that right balance when you're making a game about something that's serious, but you do want people to enjoy the experience of playing?
So I think like adding the thing I found was making sure that the emotional content was appropriate. Really helped with bringing people into the game. I think for my game, there's a lot of kind of unfortunate historical events that underpin it, and just letting people play that in a way that made them feel a certain way. Either if someone's doing something bad to them, oppressing them, then they would feel bad in a certain way, or conversely, if they were oppressing other people, like did they feel guilty about it? Did they feel uh, like they were doing something bad? And so that's sort of I think board games above any other medium of art are good at building empathy, and I think having that level of interaction on an emotional level really helps make the more kind of intellectual content more palatable and more immersive.
I just wanted everybody, or not, well, I was happy every time someone said that my game felt thematic and felt like the experience was there. Yet at the same time, I try to keep it a bit abstracted on purpose to make it sort of easily approachable for a wider audience. And I try to put it in sort of steps, like when the first time you play, you'll keep some rules out, kind of thing. But it was difficult to get the theme in there as much as I want to without getting it unnecessarily complex. And because my game is really about personal stories and personal experiences of people, as well as the bigger picture of what happened in that time. Like all the characters are real people. I want to sort of honor them or make sure that I am happy with how they're represented in the game. And then, yeah, if people say, oh, it's very thematic and I really feel like I'm playing this person with these unique abilities and this unique story behind it and it all fits, then yeah, I was just really happy when I heard those kind of comments.
I know that.
Go for it, Lauren. Then I'll bug Damon.
I know that my topic going in, I knew that my topic would be considered frivolous, and I knew that, but I wanted to do it anyway because I wanted to. I don't know if I really conveyed it well, but I wanted to kind of convey how these just kind of how the depressing kind of choices that these that were available to women in this time period for education, and what would actually go and let them quote unquote do well or not. And I just wanted to kind of go and drag out more of the more, I don't know, less thought about aspects of that particular period, because that period is so saturated in the rest of pop culture, but mostly from a romance angle.
I will say, I didn't think it was frivolous at all. I really enjoyed that topic. I enjoy it both in terms of the romance angle and the more gritty angle. So I'm glad that game is there. Damon?
As somebody who had a pretty weighty topic in regards to slavery, for me, it was just that recognition that there's a lot of games, a lot of tabletop games of various styles that I don't really want to play. And it's because they force me to either play a side that I actively dislike, or they want someone else to do it. And, that side is responsible for doing, absolutely horrendous things. So one of the things that I, started out from the beginning in my mind was like, everybody is going to be playing, one of the enslaved or someone who's escaped slavery. In regards to the fun aspect of it, I really wanted to try and, like, everybody kind of loves an underdog, and putting everybody together as a team working against, what, for a significant period of time was considered one of, the superpowers of the world. There's a distinct fun factor every time you can, quote unquote, stick it to La Man. and really sort of leaning into that side of it, I think helped make the playing of the game fun, and abstracting out some aspects of the horrors and brutalities, so that they're there if you know anything about the history. They're there if you read any of the information that I suggest for like what next at the end of the book, but you aren't forced to deal with it in a granular, in your face level.
Makes sense. So, Joe, not to pick on you or anything, but I want to make you talk about your game, because I love the fact that the victory points were in fact basically joy, and
Yeah.
I'd like to hear some more about that.
Okay. I guess so. When I was thinking about the history, I guess I was thinking about how to model the decisions that people were making at that time. So, so the kind of decision to live kind of a queer life at that time was pretty fraught. Like the idea that you could get a prison sentence or the death penalty for the crime of sodomy, as it was at the time. So I was thinking about how to model how players would need to, I guess, live their lives authentically. Like what was it that drove them to do that? And so the answer I kind of came upon was firstly community. So although it's a competitive game, like one of the main things is about creating collective joy. Is a joint is a joint project that all of the players have to do. So it's got that semi-cooperative element to it, and I wanted joy to be the driving factor, I suppose. Like it's about creating this community that's there for each other, that's lifting each other up, and I guess it's almost this idea of kind of having this massive party in the face of this kind of big wave of oppression, the kind of the looming threat of the death penalty could be like just around the corner. So but I felt like that was a good way to capture not just the queer experience in the 1720s, but to a certain extent the queer experience as it exists now, especially like in certain places in the world. So yeah, that's kind of how I landed on that as a victory point stand-in, I suppose.
Beautiful. I actually want to touch on something you said, which is that when you talk about the past, you're also making a comment on now. Would anybody like to share any modern comments they were hoping to make with their historical board games? What impact were you hoping that they would have in terms of how people saw not only the past but also ourselves in the present?
Yeah. I definitely, when I picked the theme that I picked, I knew I wanted to do a game about Cherokee culture, about indigenous culture, and I knew I wanted to avoid the colonial period because most of the existing games about indigenous North American people are about the colonial period, and I wanted to avoid war in general. And one of the main reasons I wanted to do a game on this topic and in this particular way was because indigenous people are so poorly represented in the board game space in general. Whether it's historical games may be a little bit better than the general hobby space, but it's pretty bad. There's lots of cultural appropriation, lots of inaccurate depictions, lots of just looking at the colonization time period, and just lots of things that people don't tend to see in about Native American culture. And I wanted to depict that, and that extends far beyond just the board game space. Of course, this is a problem in society just in general. indigenous people are often, forgotten or neglected or misrepresented, or they're having their culture appropriated, all of these things. And so I wanted to put something out there that showed something very authentic, to kind of, lend a counter voice to a lot of that negativity and misrepresentation that just exists in the world.
For me, it was I wanted to keep the stories alive of people. There's two characters in my game that are still alive, but all the other stories that are slowly getting forgotten. It's stories of children, and then slowly their children. I mean, I have the stories from my grandmother, and I'll tell them to my kids hopefully at some point one day if I ever have them. But it will get further and further away with some of these stories. So what I'm trying to do is keep those stories in some way or another alive, and try to get people in a different way thinking about these topics, because I think the medium of a game is much more interesting for this kind of things than, at least in some ways, than books or movies. Like you're making your own decisions, you're having your own fate sort of in hand, versus a story that's already been written and decided what you will hear and see or not hear and see in a book or movie, because they keep things out or change things partly. And here it's just like I make the decisions, and based on those decisions, the game is different. And I think that is, at least for me, the main focus of what I hope to have with the game. That people might, schools are maybe playing it, like, and kids think, oh, this is an interesting topic, and then they might research more or learn more about it, especially since I focused on the non-violent part of it, which is not really common in board games with this type of topic. Usually there's some form of violence in there. So I think for me that's the bit the case, and in general I see that all the different topics I feel of the Zenobia Award are quite diverse, which I really like. A lot of topics that I haven't seen before, which makes me also excited about these topics. And I think, I'm just happy that I can contribute a bit with my own game and with these stories as well.
In my case, I wanted my game to celebrate three things basically. Number one, education. Number two, women. In relation to education, the education of women, and then number three, diversity itself. So the way that I designed the game, I'm hoping that when someone plays my game, through the mechanism of the game, they feel that the more that they include women in the society, the more that they educate women, and the more those women are from diverse background, the more things that society as a whole can do together. So you kind of like open up the game, and you're able to do a lot more things in the game, and you can get more points, and then be able to win that way. So that was what I want to portray in my game. So even though the setting is specifically during historical Indonesia, the entire things that I want to be kind of like included in the game is something that is hopefully a lot of people can relate to, because it's not just specifically about Indonesia, specifically about that moment in time, but it's about education and about women and about diversity. And also because of that, I wanted to have all the characters in my game, the illustrations in my games, to be just all women, because I think that is something that is not often we see in the board games, that the characters are all just women. So I feel like that's something that is a little bit courageous to do, and I wanted to do that for my game specifically.
Nice.
Recently in preparation for this con, I was reminiscing about going through old notes and reminiscing about why exactly I settled upon this topic and things. And I remembered that one of the reasons I was doing this was actually because of reading about Ada Lovelace's mother, Lady Anne Byron, who was supposed to be a math prodigy, and just talking about, and something that always annoys me even now in modern day, that that societally there are things that even now it's like I have some of my friends are some of the most brilliant, talented people I know, and they, instead of going and pursuing what they're good at or their passions, they went to law school or med school just because that was what was expected of them, and that was what would go and get them the best pay salary, and so on and so forth. And then just historically, things like Murasaki Shikibu was like, it was bemoaned that she was a woman by her father, because if she had been a man, she would have been the son that he would have been proud of, instead of just as far as she could get is to be a court lady in that era. But back to the game itself. Originally, I might go and try and reincorporate this back in, actually more into the game now, now that the contest is over, because I remembered it. One of the reasons I had chosen the Regency was because women kind of were more in charge of their own educations through self-study, and so there could be a more wider, diverser array of topics that they could have pursued, but because society limited them so much into certain roles, they would not have found any kind of use for them, even if they pursued their passions. And that was something that struck me, that echoes even to this day, I find.
Interesting. Anybody else?
Yeah, so originally my game, my game takes place between 1750 and 1947. And originally I had planned on making it between 1700 until present day. And I realized that scope was absolutely insane. But for the very beginning, the intent was to kind of show how lingering systems of oppression continue to have effect today. And there was a news item that just went around that about a temple, and it's one of the largest Hindu temples in the world, and they were basically exploiting people from traditionally the lower castes, and they were paying them below minimum wage, and just basically were making them work insane hours to build this temple. And I was struck because this wasn't in rural India; this was in New Jersey that this happened. And so, yeah, these things, they still exist today, and they still have huge effects on us. And so it was important to remember that and to connect that to today, both specifically based on the Indian caste system as well as oppression more broadly.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Go.
For me, it was really a case of most people don't know a lot about Haiti. They don't know how it ended up in the situation that it's currently in, and most people only are vaguely aware of its current situation at any given point in time. Like they know, like, oh, there's a history of corruption and military coups and assassinations and lots of natural disasters, and it's a very, very poor country, which is all true, but those are symptoms. And the disease in this particular case was some of the most horrific chattel slavery that ever existed. And the process of fighting to be recognized as human beings, to gain their own liberation, and then to be recognized as French citizens, was met by France by, well, you now owe us millions of francs because we're desperately poor now that the single colony that was bringing in more money to our country than every other colony put together has decided you don't want to work for us anymore. It's the equivalent of something on the order of like 21 million francs or something like that. It's just an insane amount of money at the time. And it's largely responsible for why Haiti is still like digging its way out of, you know, the results of that war. So I really wanted to give people like just a hint of like, oh, maybe there's more going on in this country, and I should pay attention and, you know, look into it.
Excellent. Anybody want to jump in before I take an audience question? All right, I'm gonna swipe this question from Brian Holtz. So Brian had a great point. So he says, because these games have very specific points of view, as a designer, what do you give up or sacrifice when you have to simplify or streamline the game to accommodate the board game medium? And does making something more accessible make it, I guess, less relevant to your point of view? In other words, what did you have to give up and how much did it hurt?
Good question, Brian. I think it's also wrote. For me, at least, it's been mostly a struggle as to how approachable I wanted to have the game, and I feel like I've made the right choice in making it a bit more abstract than I personally would have wanted to. So for example, I have basically 5 different resources in the game, but most of them are not really different other than sort of how they look and sort of the color they have in the game. The differences are not really that big. So sometimes when I'm playing, like, yeah, okay, you can get a yellow one, I can get a blue one, instead of sometimes even naming them, because they don't really have a difference. And I think that's one of the things I wish I can have them all more unique, but then I noticed that it adds sort of the complexity that the game doesn't really, it just takes away the, making it approachable. People might forget these things, and then it takes away from the main story I want to tell, or the main elements I want to have in the game. And it's the same with like some cards that show how occupation forces on the board move around. Like I prefer, for example, to have that a bit more random, because that was usually unknown, but I sort of had to put in after a lot of playtesting that you have at least a certain idea of where they move around, even though it might be less historically fitting. It does make it a lot better gameplay. But those are just 2 examples of things that, I wish I could do differently. And I try to solve it a little bit for my game by having the different scenarios and try to focus a bit more on one element, and having specific cards and tokens in there to help with that. But still, there's a lot of things I cannot put in there if I want to be able to have a wider audience available with the game, which is more important in a way, at least at this point to me. And can always enhance it with variants or potential expansions later if I really want to have more of that in there.
For my game, first of all, there are 17,000 islands in Indonesia, and I can only fit 6 into the game. So there's no way that I'd be able to represent everything of the diversity of Indonesia. But other than that, I think the other designers can also speak to this. I find it that my biggest challenge when designing the game is about representing that time with a good fidelity in terms of what actually happened, because it's a lot harder than if you're designing, let's say, a war game. Because if you do a war game, then you have a particular battle, for example, that you can replicate, and maybe slightly a little bit more closely replicating of what happened. In my case, because my game is about women education in Indonesia that spans tens of years, if not several hundreds of years, it's hard to be able to do that in the most kind of like, through step-by-step kind of way. So I have to find a way in order to be able to highlight some of the milestones that I want to represent in the game, as well as to highlight some of the women heroes that I want to represent in the game. So the game is not necessarily an exact replication, an exact simulation of what happened during that moment of the rise of women education in Indonesia, but it captures the importance and the yeah, the highlights and the important gist of it, then that's how I feel. That's how I at least design my game.
So one of the things that I'm sad I had to take out of my game was originally I had it that you were you were hiring and firing staff, and and I'm very sad that and so it's really funny because players, when they first play the game, they are doing they instinctually think that when they hire these when they're hiring the tutors, that they're hiring them and putting them part of their staff, and that no one else can use them, versus no, you're just visiting some guy and just getting classes. They're not part of your household. But it's interesting that they instinctually are still trying to go and add it. But it was something that was so painful to me to go and take out, because I was like, no, I want to give you this huge chunk of money and watch as you agonize as you have to whittle it down to go and pay for people and accommodations and everything. But yeah, that was painful to take out.
Dude, that sounds like a good future one, though.
So there was this guy called Charles Hitchin. He was the Undercity Marshal in London, and he was incredibly corrupt. He was part of the Society for the Reformation of Manners that was going after mollies. He was also running like a racket of thieves who would go and steal people's stuff, and then he would sell it back to them when they came to him to report the crime. But he was also going to molly houses and basically, if he didn't get what he wanted from the people in the molly houses, he would send people in to arrest them all and take them in with no charges. But he basically would just kind of, try and get what he wanted through his position. And I tried so many ways to find a mechanic that would get him in, because I just think it's just such an interesting part of that history. He actually ended up getting caught in a sting operation and getting arrested himself in the end. But yeah, I think I just really wanted to get that part of the history into the game, and every time I tried, the game is just kind of begging to be simpler than any mechanism that I could work out to get him in. So I might still try and shoehorn him in, but yeah, that's. I mean, there's been so many things that I've had to lose, but that one was really difficult.
I think I already mentioned that my original idea was to cover the entire revolution. And when I realized how precisely complicated the revolution itself was, and that there was not going to be a good way to do it, where everybody was going to be working together in what I felt was going to be a reasonable time frame. Like, I've given it much more thought now, and I think there's still a game there, but I think it'll take about twice as long to actually design in order for it to still be playable in 2 hours or less. So I'm really glad that it didn't go that route, but it involved having each player playing a different group of people who lived in Saint Domingue that were not what they call the big whites, the Grand Blanc. And because at one point or another, pretty much everybody allied with everybody else against the Grand Blanc during the Haitian Revolution. So I was trying to find different ways where it was going to be a semi-cooperative game where players were going to have an ability to join together in an alliance to defeat the Grand Blanc. But you would have player elimination if you were unable to meet your own particular conditions that were necessary for you to, remain part of an alliance, or everybody else could win except for you. And it was fascinating, but it was a huge design challenge, and I was not feeling that I was going to be able to manage it with the tight time frames that we were having to deal with. So in the process of simplifying, I ended up with, the deck building first half of the game, which I'm actually quite proud of.
Nice. Anybody else want to slip in before another question?
Yeah, so I'll just say personally, I thought the biggest challenge was making sure that the game gave proper respect to the subject matter. And that proved challenging because it's a very complex subject matter. And I've started finding that as I removed concepts, at some point it was oversimplifying certain things in a way that made me uncomfortable. That a lot has been said. Liz, I think was the last year at SDHistCon when you had to talk with I think it was Volko and David Thompson and some other people about how to represent kind of problematic historical concepts. And one of the big things was that basically if you have kind of an abstract Euro game that focuses on an offensive topic, like that's problematic, versus if it really covers the history and gives detail, that's a much better way of portraying a difficult topic. And so that was just kind of a constant give and take, was like, how much was I comfortable with getting rid of? And then inevitably I'd start putting things back in just to be a little more respectful. But I still have a lot of streamlining to go. And so that's going to be the fun part of the rest of the process.
Nice.
I also forgotten which person had a game, but that had to remove or adjust things after judges' feedback. I forgot whose game it was exactly, but because there were things being done in the game they were not supposed to be allowed, like people getting killed when they were not supposed to. But
That was me.
I forgot whose game it was. Yeah, okay.
It was me. I accidentally created a murder mechanic. I was very displeased. I read the feedback. One of the judges said to me, were you intending to allow these ladies to go and be killed with no repercussions? Because that is nice commentary, but and I just sat, I think I sat on it for like 3 days trying to figure out what they were doing, and then realizing what they were doing. And
that's low-key a little awesome. But so I guess this also leads naturally to another sort of question, which is, we talked about the fun factor of your games and wanting people to connect with and receive your games well. But to what extent do you think that your message has come through historically in terms of what you were trying to say with your game? So you made choices about what to put in, you play tested it with multiple groups of people. Have you felt that your statement about your chosen time period and subject has been received on the other end? And what are some thoughts you might have about how to influence the way somebody receives your work?
So one thing I want to mention on this is that it's really interesting to see some people really get it and really love it. There's definitely like some people that have played it that they're just like, this game's not for me. I'm not interested in it. They don't like the semi-cooperative nature of it. It just doesn't hit, And then I've also had these people in the between, which are really interesting, who play the game. Maybe they've played Euro games in the past, and they're sort of used to the conventions of that. And my game is just different enough that it makes them kind of uncomfortable, and they start off not really sure how they feel about it, but after playing it a couple times, they really like it, and they start to see the potential in a different way. So like, I think that's a really awesome feeling when somebody like comes into it and it's just weird enough to them that they're like, I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know if I like it or not, but I definitely want to keep playing. And then they start kind of thinking about this different way, and I think that's pretty fantastic, and I really enjoy that because it means that something in my game is getting across mechanically and not just thematically, which I think is really when you know you're hitting something right with a board game, like when the mechanics back up the theme in such a way that like you have to play a little bit differently and think about it a little bit differently in order to get in the mindset of the theme, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Anybody else want to jump in?
Well, I feel that I'm sort of happy because of the way I made the game, as in that I have a scenario-based game versus a one type of game, because otherwise I would probably not be fully happy. And I noticed that for the audience of the judges, my game might be a bit on the lighter, more abstract side of it. As I mentioned already a few times, that I try to make it a bit more abstract and that way sort of easier to get into and streamline, so that I can have more people jump in and play the game. But at the same time, yeah, for people who do like this very historical based games that really want all the details in there, I wish I could put some more in that. So I am still trying to see if I can do that somehow with some variants or some ways to, as I said, with potential expansions to get it to where I fully want to have it. But at the same time, I think there's enough in there that I'm sort of happy with, like with how it is now. So I think the reception of the game, to really answer that question, is better overall for a bigger group. But for people who really want all the like to have it as complex as I maybe also want to have it, it's tough. And I think partly for me a reason is that when playtesting the game, it's often with new groups, and so I don't want to put too much, and with a limited amount of time, I often don't have the time and energy to put like playtest all of it, which is maybe not necessarily the best approach for finding the complexity. But I get a lot of great feedback and great replies and comments when people play it, and I think at some point I thought I'd make a basic version and a complex version, but I think that might not be the best solution. I think that the fact that I have multiple scenarios that get a bit more complex, a bit more focused and real is good, because there is also this maximum maybe capacity of what people can do before it gets maybe too complex and analytical. And it helps that it's a cooperative game, but still so it is a bit less than I intended, but not as much as it could have, and I found some solutions personally for my game to mitigate that, at least current, like at the moment, and with ideas of how to fix it better or more in the future, potentially.
To be honest, Liz, this is something that I still need to find out, and as the games, hopefully, more people would know about the game, and this is actually one point of concern for me, because my topic specifically is about a setting that a lot of people probably unfamiliar about. Not that many people know about Indonesia, and what concerns me would be, why would they care about the game if it's set up in a place that they maybe never heard of or they don't really care about? So that is always a question at the back of my mind, and this might open up a different discussion here, but I've mentioned this also to my my fellow Zenobia finalists here in our own chat, that I've always curious about, how do you design a game as someone from my background, for example, like a minority game designer, for example. How do you design a game about your own background, about your own culture, without it being seen as a game by a particular set of people for that particular set of people. You know what I mean? So it's like people will simply think that, oh, this is a game about Indonesia that only Indonesian people care about. You know, so it's that's always. I still don't know the answer to that. Like, how do you bridge that? Would people still be interested in a particular game if the theme is not something that they're familiar with, or it's not something that they immediately that immediately have kind of like any kind of closeness to. So yeah, so that's definitely something that I'm still kind of like trying to explore and trying to understand and still trying to learn. Hopefully, I would know better after seeing how the game perceived a bit wider outside of just the Zenobia competition.
I just want to say I really appreciate you making that point. I think that, wondering where your game is going is just as important as seeing where it's gone so far. And I think that's a great share. Anybody else? Yeah.
For me, I think that looking back on it, I'm not quite sure what I was thinking in making the choices that I made. I know that there are people who absolutely love deck builders and some people who just really don't like them or don't get them. I know that a lot of people like a game that's got just one solid like build up, where it climaxes and then the game ends. And my game is played in two separate stages, like forcing you to sort of like do the deck building as a way of the planning for the revolution, and then the planning of the revolution is almost in its own way like the culmination of what you've been doing, and then how you're in the previous first half, and then like how you're going to adjust for the places where you made mistakes. I know that it sits in kind of a weird spot. I did get a lot of really great feedback from testers that people who didn't particularly like war games were enjoying it. People who didn't particularly like deck builders enjoyed it. Like, I think I managed to mostly get the mechanics in the sweet spot of there's enough other stuff going on that if one particular type of thing isn't really your deal, other parts of the game will catch on. But I've definitely ran across feedback from people who just weren't feeling the two-stage part, and some people who just weren't really feeling the more strategic, combat side of it when you revert to the map part of the game. And I'm not sure that there's a real way that can be addressed. I recognize that not every game can nor should be for every person, but I'm certainly doing my best not to actively alienate anyone.
I would say on that point about your game not necessarily being for everyone, I think that was something that I confronted in the process of it. I've definitely had feedback about so you're playing a Molly, and you kind of, I think hopefully most people would build up a relationship with the Molly that they're playing and kind of get attached to them. And there's the chance during the course of the game that you might get the death penalty, which means that you lose that character that you've kind of built this bond with. And like I've had people who think that or who've suggested maybe like toning that down a bit or that kind of thing. And to me, that's kind of part of the essence of the game. Is it's all about the fact that it's this really tragic history, and that I think there is fun in the game, and it feels great when everything's going to plan, and then there's always the chance that something horrendous is going to happen. And I think for me, I want that to hit quite hard and kind of contrast with the rest of the game, which is quite fun, and it's about putting on parties and all that kind of thing. So I think I've had to accept that the game's not for everyone. Not everyone wants to feel bad when they're playing a game, but I think I need to stay true to the history and kind of leave that message in there, I think.
Yes, please do. That I'm so sad someone didn't like that, because I was, I think watching your demo, I thought that was one of the things that struck me the most about the game. So please keep that in.
Yeah, I actually
Yeah.
think that that's the point of the Zenobia Award, right? In a way, is that you should be identifying with people in situations that are surprising to you or that you don't understand. Like that's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I do also really understand that it's difficult with many or maybe all of our themes in all in different ways. I was all the time worried that people might, like, because it's potentially about their parents or grandparents or themselves, thinking, yeah, why do you make a game about such a topic where, people died and got in horrible situations, and it's the same with many of the other games. So I can definitely understand that it's been difficult at the start, and at some point for me it helped that I've been working with it, talking with it often, and got so far many positive replies and not really any negative ones. And I think indeed the Zenobia Award helps a lot to put indeed the attention to the topics that are not there yet, like that where there's no game about yet. But I definitely understand what the others are saying, that it's difficult to stay fully true to history, and put it in there the way you want to, and not and just ignore feedback from certain people can be difficult to, because you want to make a good game, you want to make an interesting game, and then sometimes 10 people say they like it and then one person says they don't, and then you might start to reconsider things just because of this one person. So that's sometimes tough, I think, for everybody, especially because all of us are quite new to game design. It might be something we're all learning right now.
Absolutely. So I want to bring in a few things from the chat because I know this is being recorded for posterity. So let's make sure that all these great thoughts are coming in. So Sharia actually had some more to say in the chat to Volko, talking about how, yes, worrying about the theme of your game being compelling is something everybody worries about. But this is more pressing for someone in a, quote, diverse game designer category, because people who are already kind of looking at you as other might not show the same interest in your theme and think that that's natural, because that's exactly the attitude that we're swimming against pretty frequently in gaming right now. And then I thought Damon also brought in a great point, which is that that Joe is right to recognize what their game really is about, and then stay on point even when feedback conflicts with your mission. Does anybody want to pop in some more about those topics? I actually think this really hits at the heart of the point of Zenobia in a way.
Well, I actually, since nobody immediately jumped in, I had a thought, and I sort of shared it a bit with the contestants, is that I think that in the early stage of the game, when we have to submit like our our high concept proposal in order to move on to the prototyping stage, we effectively have to come up with a thesis statement. What is our game? What is it modeling? And I think that having something like that, that's like maybe expanded to 3 or 4 paragraphs, a quote unquote one sheet or what have you, that talks about what the game is about, what your objectives are, and have it go with the game at each stage that it's being reviewed and judged, so that feedback can potentially be a little bit more targeted towards what it is that we're trying to achieve, and not at the expense of like, oh well, here is just a mechanical thing and it's different than the mechanics that you're using, but the when is the suggestion of simplifying something or removing something or adding something I'm going to just pull away or take you in a completely different direction than what you're trying to achieve. Because in a real game situation, when you're in the your friendly local gaming store, you're reading the back of the box text, or you've done some research online and you've gotten a pretty good idea of what the game is about, and now you're sitting down to to make the choice of buying it or to actually play it, and you have this really solid concept of what the designer was trying to achieve. And I don't know that every judge was necessarily keeping in mind what we were aiming for versus the things that are their personal preference, based on the feedback that we all shared with each other.
Yeah, I'll kind of reiterate that I did something very similar to that. As I was making this, I had sort of a set of objectives or principles that I really wanted to, really wanted the game to deliver, right? And anytime I was changing a mechanic or adding something or taking something away, it always kind of went back to, is this adding to the objectives? Is it like really getting across what I want to get across? Or is it, taking away from that? And that really in my process became really important. And like, once I got into I started this game before Zenobia, and once I got into Zenobia, that's really what I focused on, because I really had to define that stuff and then make sure everything fit it and fully, realized all those objectives that I was trying to get. But having that all written down and like defined really helped a lot.
So I generally think that all feedback is important, because even if it's not even if it doesn't tell you something about the project you're getting feedback on, it's telling you something about the person who's giving you the feedback. But one of the things I found when looking at the feedback that I was receiving was trying to figure out the point of view of the person giving the feedback, because maybe one of the things that was happening was that I wasn't explaining things properly, which is a tendency for me. And or that there was one person who commented very early on in the contest process. To sum it up, they were basically like, "Well, what about the men?" And it was like, "Okay, why am I getting this? Let's go and let's go and see what." And it was like, "Oh, I guess okay." It was just kind of funny to go and see, but it's just always kind of interesting, some of the feedback you get, and kind of it's just too bad, because especially this particular last round of feedback, I have so many questions about some of the things they said. But yeah.
So speaking of feedback and just the Zenobia process in general, I know that there are no official plans yet for a Zenobia 2, but if there were to be one, would you encourage people to go for it, and what advice would you give?
Yes, absolutely. My advice would be start today, because you're going to run out of time. If you're at all interested, and this is something that you've had as kind of a pipe dream, just do it. There's not really, the nice thing about the Zenobia program is that it kind of scales a little bit. So there's like, it's very step by step. So you can start just kind of researching now, and basically you'll just learn a lot about something. And if you want to keep going with the game, you can keep going then. If you don't, all you'll have lost is that you learned something. But yeah, I would absolutely recommend doing it.
Yeah, very well said. I agree entirely.
Yeah,
Yes,
totally.
you know,
Yeah, me
second,
too.
third, that
Yes,
absolutely.
I would recommend, when you're choosing a topic, because you will be living with this topic for a long time, that you choose a topic that you're fine with living with for a long time and thinking about constantly, because that would have been there were other topics that I was like, yeah, there was no way I could do that for this long of a period.
Yeah.
I also want to say that the organizers of the Zenobia Award has been absolutely supportive, and we got a lot of motivations from our relationship and our communication with them. So that's another amazing part of going through this entire process for me, because like I said at the beginning, I absolutely have no idea, no end, no tails, and how can you design a board game. So just going through the process, having everything kind of like broken down for me really helps. So if you're ever interested in designing a board game and just wanting to know more about how going through this competition actually helped a lot. And another thing that I also want to mention, and hopefully you are as lucky, our cohort this year has been amazing, and I felt very lucky of knowing all of my fellow finalists, and we are actually quite close with one another as well, and everyone's been really supportive with one another. So on top of that, you get new good friends who are also as crazy into board games as you are. So really it's a win-win situation all across the board.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's well, you can maybe already start sleeping and resting if you want to apply for next year, because yeah, it's definitely a tough period time-wise, with the deadlines getting much quicker than you wish or hoped for. It's also what I heard from the other people, but it definitely applies for me as well. And even though I had a bit more time, with less other work to do, it still was a lot of it took a lot of time and effort. And I think maybe if people want to apply next year, for example, or another time, if there will be one, it can already be smart to write the proposal. It was the first time I actually thought up my game in those kind of ways and with those kind of elements written down. Like, you always have them in your head, but I think it could be just a good basis, maybe even if you don't decide to apply. And yeah, I think the support that we're giving each other now through our own Discord group, I think, is really useful and helpful. And I think that is maybe one of the other things that you can get out of a competition if you decide to apply it. No matter what stage you get into it, it's always very helpful. And if you do get all the way to the end, even if you don't win, you still get a lot of interesting contacts and people and feedback. And yeah, the fact that you're between like-minded people with a similar ideas and focus, I think is really just another really good way and reason to just apply if there will be another one at some point.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it. No, go.
The just the amount of help, just being able to ask for help is just so invaluable. It's like all the people running the contest and all the volunteers, it was just so nice to be able to ask questions and get help that way. And then it's just, even if it does sound like a lot of work, it's just such a I could not go and recommend this more, because it's just like participating in any of those, like right now it's November, national novel, I don't know the acronym, but just you would just get that much further in whatever board game project you had than if you didn't participate in it. And I think that's just so invaluable.
Excellent. So, talking about being among like-minded people, we actually have a question from Kate in the audience who wants to know, how much did you share your idea with other people in your process? And from the sounds of it, I would guess a lot, but I'm interested in details.
You mean
Yes.
other contestants or in general?
I'm going to assume other contestants.
If we showed it to each other or just
I can clear that up if that helps. I can clear it up. What I meant was, I have just got this idea, and we've just been talking in the chat about the idea of my, putting the idea together and working on it and so on. And I'm immediately struck by who should I tell about the specific idea in order to get myself enough of a team to be able to do this job, but at the same time not sort of spread it out so much that I'm going to worry about somebody else getting there before me.
Okay, so for me personally, I think I'm solely believe very much in the more you can share it, the better, because you get feedback, you get people maybe already interested. My experience so far is that people are much more interested to make their own ideas and games than try to steal anyone's idea or try to take over your idea. And I think a game can only be really get good if it's play tested often and shared, and it helps to define your direction a bit as well. So I think personally that it's just always good to share it and try to get a basic idea of what you want to make, how you want to make it, test it out, and um, probably you will have put in much more time and energy and have more ideas and knowledge of what doesn't work uh, than anyone else that might be interested in a similar theme. Um, I do notice that there is a lot of games with similar themes coming out now as my game sort of suddenly that I didn't know about, which might seem like my theme is less unique than it was when I started 4 years ago. But I also know that's not because I've started making this game. It's just that I think there's more attention to this type of theme, and I think that is I just think it's most important that you're making a game that you're happy with, and that other people want to play as well, unless you make it purely for yourself. So I think the more you can share it, the more you can play test it, the better. I don't know any stories of people taking an idea and then suddenly publishing it without you knowing, or it's my experience at least.
Yeah, Marcel, I think you said it.
Sorry. I think it's important to recognize that if all 8 of us had gotten together before the competition and talked, and we all decided to make a game on the exact same theme, you would end up with, let's see, 8 of us, probably about 20 different games.
Yeah.
There's because each of
completely.
us has right. Each of us has our own unique perspective. And so even if we were like, okay, we're all going to make a deck building game that takes a cultural historical view of the education of revolutionary people from a caste system, you would still while historians are trying to argue about which one is actually the legitimate one, every one of them would be different, and most of us would probably have multiple versions of different sets of mechanics for that idea, and have finally decided on which one we wanted to move forward. It's just the hard part is not coming up with an idea. Like, ideas are a dime 3 dozen. What makes a designer is the work that gets you from the idea to something that someone can actually sit down and play through. I would never worry about telling somebody about my ideas.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. Well said. I would just add to that everyone I've ever met in this industry has been pretty supportive and collaborative. And no, I've never met anyone who seemed to want to steal an idea as well. And then secondly, I would say that once you start telling people that you're designing a board game, then they start asking you about it every time they talk to you. And so that's a great way to stay motivated, because you don't want to be that person who said, I'm designing a board game, and then you never follow through with it. It's helpful to have, your entire community of friends and family just constantly asking you, and you're like, okay, well, I better actually get to doing some of this work then. It's a helpful motivation.
I had been once told that, or I've been told a couple times that that or at least in terms of writing, that only you can go and tell the story that you want to tell. And that, I think that also applies to board games. Only you could go and make the board game that you want to make. So and plus the support you could get is would just be that much more heartening, as everyone has been saying.
Fantastic. All right, so all good things must come to an end. We're just about out of time. So I'll ask everybody one last question, which is, you've gone through this whole Zenobia process. Do any of you have fresh game designs in mind, or are you still kind of developing the Zenobia one and it'll be on to the next project later?
Well, I can tell that even though my game is on Kickstarter for 4 more days, I couldn't help myself of making a new scenario for an expansion already, knowing that the game will get there, which is sort of not a different project, but still I made a one from start to finish when I had some other things I need to do actually, but I just got some ideas, and then but I have some earlier games that I try to go back to sometimes, just to make sure that I sometimes get fresh eyes on all my other projects. But I might be in a bit of a different position right now than some of the other people, because I am in a campaign which almost ending. But at the same time, that's also a reason why I do want to work on some other things again soon, I think. Just for a while at least.
I've got a game called Paleo Vet that's a little dice and card game about being a veterinarian for dinosaurs. It's just a much lighter, still a strategic game, but it's much lighter. And that's something I'm going to try to get back on Kickstarter probably in March. So it's a really fun, really pretty little game that's, for a very wide audience.
That sounds so cute.
I mentioned this before, as much as I, at the beginning, before joining Zenobia, I always felt like designing a board game is like designing a rocket ship for me. Now, after going through with the process with Zenobia, I have a lot of different ideas of different kind of games that I would like to be able to develop. And interestingly, now as I go around just like normal life, different things would pop up, and I thought, oh, that could be a game, or let me write that down. Like it's suddenly I just have a different way of looking at things and looking at the world in a more gamifying lens, which I think I actually kind of like it. So that might be another side effect that you would experience if you join the entire process.
And then on top of that, you have a community that you could kind of turn to go and share your project with now. I think that's like wonderful.
I have 3 games right now that I'm working on. One is a expandable, customizable card game that is, for lack of a better term, futuristic cyber indigenous game in an uncolonized future, I guess the easiest way of stating it. I've got one that I'm actually designing with my wife that is blending African diasporic folklore along with sort of like Polish stories called Grandmother's Tales that we're creating basically for our kid. And I just signed a contract to do another deck builder, which, in 2 years we'll probably see light of day. So always busy.
I have a couple other ideas that I've started doing research on and compiling thoughts. And I'm going to do the exact opposite of what I just recommended to Kate, and I'm not going to share those yet.
You can trust me. I'm only media.
Yeah, right.
All right. Anybody else before we wrap this?
Oh, I mean, my game I'm working on, the other one is a Gladiator 2-player game with which is a lot more violent than I'm working on now, on a very different topic that I hope to publish at some point in the next few years or so.
Excellent.
And I'm having a license of a game that's being built, which is also interesting thing when I have distilled license for the Dutch market. So I'm curious to see how that all goes. So I have to work on that as well from a different point.
All right, hopefully a bright future for all of you Zenobia finalists. I'm so grateful that you were all here for this session. This has been awesome to talk to you all again. I always hope that we will speak again soon. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to this panel. It has been so great to see so many of you here and interacting in the chat and here to listen to all these amazing people. Thank y'all all so much. Have a great day. Happy gaming, and come back at 4 if you want to hear Jason Perez and me talking about historical theming, tourism in games, and the things that we elide when we're trying to make a pleasant historical gaming experience.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Yeah, thanks, Liz.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Liz.
Liz.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liz.